So it's been about 4 years since I started my real estate investing journey. After I graduated college, I've been living in houses that I've purchased primarily as investments as well as places to live. And I wanted to give you guys a recap on the 3 different properties that I've dealt with since that time and break down the profitability and give you guys my recommendation on whether or not it's been worth it in terms of an investment, both on the return on investment as well as just the time commitment and whether or not being in my 20s, I think this has been a valuable use of my time or not. And we'll get into all that later. So how I'm going to break this down is going property by property. So my first house that I purchased in Texas, my second property, which is the condo in SF. I'll do a quick overview of that because I have a separate video going over the pros and cons and sort of my thoughts and lessons learned there. And then my third investment property that I'm sitting in right now, including the apartment that I built on the property that I'm currently living in. So without further ado, we can jump into the first house in Texas that I purchased. So I'll put the numbers up on the screen here so it's easier for you guys to see, but I wrote some notes so I stay on track with what we're talking about here. So the first one I purchased for $365,000. I'm gonna give you just the numbers here. The addresses aren't gonna be in the video, but the purchase price was $365,000. And in terms of expenses, there was a down payment. So the breakdown, of course, I'm going to do very rough profitability. Okay, this is not a P&L worksheet. I'm not going to go through all the operating expenses. This is just a very high level view for you guys to get a picture of generally whether or not it's been worth it. That's basically the idea here. So expenses, I used a conventional loan because I wasn't aware of the VA at the time and I don't think I was eligible yet. So 20% down, that was give or take 60 to 70,000, including closing costs. I then did some mostly DIY renovations since it was my first house. If you guys remember, I did the review of Cabot Debt Correct that seems a lot of people enjoyed. And a lot of the stuff that I just did myself because it was my first property. I didn't have a lot of expendable income after putting the down payment to spend on renovations and things like that. But I wanted to get the house ready to both rent as well as make it the way I liked it so that, of course, I'd be living in it. The intent with the first house was to be a house hack. And so for those of you guys that are not aware, I don't really like that term, it sounds bad, but basically you purchase the house and living by myself, I could live in an apartment, but I could also buy a house and then rent out the rooms that I'm not living in. That's the idea, right? So you offset your mortgage payment that way. And I've gone into depth in other videos about that as well, but comment if you guys have any questions and I'm always happy to answer where I can. But it's a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house. And the idea, once again, was that I lived in one of the bedrooms. Specifically, I lived in the smallest bedroom that shared a bathroom with one of the tenants. So I had to be very picky about who I selected with living in the property in terms of tenant screening. And I'll talk about that a little bit later as well. But again, expenses all in probably about 100,000 in terms of if we're including closing costs, down payment, renovations, furnishing the house. It was fully furnished when I rented it out, ready to be rented in terms of the 2 other rooms. So the 1 master with the ensuite bath, with the bathroom itself, and then the shared bathroom with me that had a separate room, of course, in the house. And then I lived in the smallest one. So operating expenses in terms of yearly expenses, I'm gonna just put that it's barely 1,000. Maybe we'll call it maybe like $5,000 a year, which is negligible if we're considering the general values that we're working with here in terms of real estate. So there's been very minimal expenses with that property because it's a very simple 3-bed, 2-bath, very manageable first starter home kind of deal. It was like it's 1,200 square feet. Fenced backyard, sort of HOA kind of vibe on like a very regular street in suburbia America. So there are currently still very low operating expenses because of that, which I think is a good thing. And my recommendation to anybody, as I'll talk about later, is that your first investment property should not be, a 30-unit apartment complex or anything crazy that you don't know what to deal with. Because if you start small, you'll learn plenty from that, and you'll spend and make your mistakes at a much smaller scale than you otherwise would, trying to do what everybody thinks is possible because of these YouTube videos that made $1 million in my first flip and I have no experience. Like, that's never going to happen. Okay, so you gotta take a look in the mirror and be realistic sometimes. But nonetheless, the income on that property. So I've talked about expenses. Generally, like, I'm just bucketing this in terms of basic expenses that I, all into the property, like about 100,000. And then in terms of income, so because I lived in it for about the last 3 years, so before this year, I had the 2 tenants that I rented out to, who fortunately were great tenants. I had no problems with. We got along very well, good habits and all that. So give or take, the net income in terms of the monthly income was probably about 1,700 to 1,800. The mortgage was more than that, but it offset the majority of the mortgage payments. But I covered all the utilities, which was another couple $100. So I was still out of pocket, probably like $500 or $600 a month. Although, if you consider, well, okay, I'm investing in real estate and I'm spending let's say I'm spending $600 a month for an investment property that I'm living in. Well, the alternative is that I could live in an apartment, spend $2,500 a month, live somewhere nice, and get zero equity. That none of that money is going towards my equity in the property eventually that I could sell or what have you. And yes, I understand that the first few years of the mortgage you're just paying the interest, which is also why I've been making an extra principal payment, which anybody out there should do if you can afford it. Just a couple $100 that go directly to the principal, not the principal, to paying down, the principal amount on your mortgage, so it doesn't just go your interest, the first few years. In terms of income, we'll say that it's break even, just in terms of, for the purposes of this video. There are other ways that I could look at this in terms of, obviously I have to pay taxes on rental income, so that decreases it, but I don't see that till the end of the year that I have to pay the taxes on. And of course I can depreciate the property on my taxes so that if I go to sell, then I can adjust my cost basis so it's lower, right? So if the property is depreciated 100,000 and I purchased it for 350, which is about what it was, then my adjusted cost basis would be 250. So if I go to sell, then it's the adjusted capital gains for that. And of course, you pay less taxes on a depreciated property. But that's not how we're going to look at this, because all of these properties I did not purchase under an LLC, any of that stuff, because I was going to live in it, right? So that was the intent, is that it was a property that I'm going to purchase to then live in. I used a primary residence, conventional 20% down loan, and that's the way I went about it. So those other considerations would be if it was solely an investment property, that you're going full throttle. It's a little bit different. As you can tell so far, profitability wise, it's like, okay, it's not great. Just in terms of the raw numbers of, has it been worth it within the last 3-4 years after I purchased it? Understand that real estate is not like if you're flipping, of course, that's different, which is the next property. But the time horizon for all these properties that I'm purchasing with the intent to keep them, it's not to, of course, keep them for 4 or 5 years and then get rid of it. Because during that time, the current value of the first house that I purchased, which I still own, which I have a tenant in right now that I'll need to rent out the entire house soon to new tenants because he's moving out. The current value is the same, if not less, than when I purchased it. Okay, so that is just a byproduct of when I purchased it, the rates were really good, but I overpaid for the house. I mean, I wanted to live in, a good area and all that. But I think that's just to say that the expectation can't be that you're going to make money quickly. Okay, that's honestly with a lot of different things, right? You can scale a business much quicker than you can real estate, which is why, on this channel, hopefully you guys see some more content about, if I'm starting a business or doing something with an idea versus me buying another property, because I think it's better use of my time. But you have to have like a 10, 20, 30-year time horizon for purchasing any of these properties. Generally speaking, if you want to guarantee any sort of profit, and nothing's guaranteed, right? Like anything can happen. But if you look at S&P 500, real estate investment trusts, just like property values over time, it goes up, but it's not linear, right? If you guys watch this video, it's probably this way, right? So it's like up and down, and that sort of thing. So unfortunately, I've been losing money on the property, but it's short term, right? This is a short term review of my investment property profitability. Okay, so just bear that in mind. We've talked enough about the first property, but that one I do plan on keeping, probably forever. There's no major issues with it, no foundation problems and anything like that. It's just cookie cutter, simple, easy on the brain. I'm going to hold on to it, and that's that. So the second property, that being my condominium in San Francisco, if you guys have been around for a while, you would have seen content about this already that I've talked about my lessons learned. So I'm not going to spend too much time here. But the intent here was that I was going to flip it. Okay, so that was cut and dry. I plan on buying the property. It's off market. Used a realtor that, it worked out okay in terms of, the intent to turn it around. It was really old. We ended up finally getting permits from the city to do all the work on it. But the time and place were both wrong. That being that it was purchased at the absolute height of property values after COVID had settled down and everybody, wanted to purchase a house and the interest rates were really low. Property values went up. And then as soon as the Fed started raising interest rates, I think during 2022, everybody, stopped buying houses, and they decided that, they wanted to wait till the interest rate came back down, which it's probably never going to get back to 2% again, but that's the idea. And so I purchased the house, or the condo rather, at a very expensive price so I'll give you guys the numbers. So I purchased it for $630,000. The expenses here were that I had to use a hard money loan, so the interest rate was extremely high during the period of, the holding period of the property, right? Because when you're flipping a property, you have to keep in mind that you have to hold on to it and pay the mortgage yourself for the amount of time it takes to get the project done. And as you can probably imagine, and if you watch the other videos, you would know that the project took way longer than it was supposed to take, which probably affected the sale price at the end of the day because of the market conditions. But I spent about, of course, including closing costs, I also spent $210,000 on renovations, including, so that's not just renovations, probably closer to like $150,000 on renovations, but the entire thing was practically gutted, not down to studs because you can't do that with the HOA in a condo, but nothing was left untouched, kitchen, bathroom, all that. But obviously, having now built this here in Texas, there was nothing here before, and I made it look like this. It's night and day. It's just different geographic areas kind of impact what you can do in terms of, with the money that you have, right? So wrong place, wrong time. Expenses, we'll call it like around $200K, but income for that was zero. During the entire time of the renovations, you can't Airbnb, you can't, well, obviously the condo HOA didn't let you do Airbnb anyway, but you can't do any short-term rentals. You can't, you have contractors in there flipping your property, and like they're doing the renovations to make it the way you want it. And that wasn't possible. So there was no money coming in. It was all money going out. And I spent every last drop of savings that I had and had to take out more loans and open new credit cards to pay off the project, which was very stress-inducing at the time. So that in itself, thinking back to that time, having to deal with that renovation and the pain that it is. Anybody out there that's flipped a property, even if it went really well, that it's like a full-time job dealing with all the things that go with the start to finish of, conceptualizing the project, getting the architectural drawings, getting the appropriate, approvals from the city, pulling permits, all that, to actually, getting it on the market again, staging, getting everything, just right. And then things that go wrong during the project, right? The things that take longer than you expect, or a contractor does something wrong, or something goes in the wrong place. And you have to deal with so many different touch points of like different people, because a simple matter of fact, you can't do everything yourself. You can't be your own realtor, plumber, electrician, staging person, photographer. Like there's like probably 20, 30 different trades between everything real estate and general contracting wise, in terms of trades that need to be utilized to make that sort of thing happen. It's very involved. So that in itself took up probably a year and a half of my time outside of my day job, which I still work, obviously, and I'm still in the Army Reserve. Like it's, then you have to think about, do you have time for friends and family and all this other stuff, right? So like you have to really think about your priorities and whether or not this type of thing is worth it, especially when you're putting this much of your actual earned income into this sort of investment, right? So the sale price was $690,000. So you'd think that, well, I bought it for $630, sold it for $690. That's $60K in margin. But even if that were the case, if you pay short-term capital gains on that, you would make almost nothing after all the fees you'd have to pay to your realtor and the closing costs on both ends. Not to mention that I spent about $200,000 on renovations and all other things that went along with the property to deal with, and so the net loss was roughly $150,000. So, of course, that's tax deductible. Decreased my adjusted gross income on my tax returns. Hired a CPA to do their magic on that, so I didn't, screw it up. But that's that. I think I've talked enough about the condo. Again, there's more content I have that on my channel about that during the time that I made those mistakes and the lesson learned. So let's move on to the third property, which I'm sitting in right now, that being my second house that I purchased in Texas, that I built an apartment or an ADU, or a detached ADU above the detached garage in the property, which is probably, well, I'll get to my recommendations later. So we'll start with purchase price was $575, so just over $500,000. The expenses, so I used the VA loan because I spent the entirety of last year on deployment, spending my entire deployment money on paying off the loans that I had outstanding from the condo flip in San Francisco. So the better part of my mid-20s has been spent dealing with real estate, but more on that later. So 0% down VA, which is really great. If you have the VA loan eligible to you, like you should definitely use it. I feel like it's a no-brainer. But don't use it on a property that you either can't afford outright or are biting off too much. What is it? Biting too much to chew? Something like that. I think you guys know what I'm trying to say, but it's been a long day. I'm still trying to get this content out to you guys because I've been slacking on the content of this channel. So this has been on my mind lately, and I just wanted to make sure I got the notes down to share with you guys. But I probably spent, in terms of expenses, okay, so 0% VA, closing costs, you have to pay for those, of course, about $100,000 on renovations. The operating expenses of this investment property are yet to be seen, just because it's only the first year. I moved in earlier this year, and I think like early next year will mark a year being here. The income is also sort of yet to be seen because I am having some troubles renting out the rooms in the other house. So the idea here is that this is a 4-bed, 2-bath house. Okay, so the main house has 4 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. The ADU that I created above the detached garage, the garage is below. You should watch the garage apartment tour video if you haven't already, so you can see the whole thing. but this is a 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom apartment that I created to live in myself. So normally what people would do is they buy a house with an ADU in the garage or something, and they use that sort of mother-in-law suite sort of deal to rent that out to supplement their income to pay off the mortgage in the main house. Earlier this year, when I was still living in Hawaii, because for some reason I thought that was a good idea, I was renting somebody else's ADU, just like I'm living in now, but it's the opposite situation. And I was paying an arm and a leg for it. I want to say it was like 2,300 bucks a month, utilities included. And I was living in Honolulu in Hawaii, and I loved it. It was great, living my best life in the Pacific. But that is not a sustainable lifestyle. And landlord was great. There's nothing wrong. I mean, he's charging probably what is about market rate for rent, frankly. But it'd be awesome if I could charge that here. But that was not going to work. It was just too much. And I was trying to find a house to buy. That didn't work out either. So I bought the house here, and I'm still trying to find tenants. Problem being that it is very far from the metropolitan area that I live in. So I would say that, let's say you're buying a house in the Seattle area. Okay, if you're from Seattle, you would probably know that, like like a generally reasonable or acceptable commute is probably like north of Seattle would probably be like Linwood to downtown Seattle, right? Very few people are going to rent an apartment in Everett or like Mukilteo or that whole area and then work in downtown Seattle, right? You're just going to find something closer. Even if rents are super cheap up in Everett, which is, for those of you that don't know, it's about 30 to 40 miles away. I want to say it's about 30 miles away, which is give or take 35, 45 minutes in traffic to get downtown. And that's just kind of a reference point that I want to use in terms of, if you're thinking about doing this sort of house hack type of thing, one of the trade-offs of doing that is that you are not going to be able to live right downtown like you otherwise would if you rented an apartment, right? So I can't go live in a high-rise apartment in downtown LA. Well, I mean, I could, but you're not going to be able to buy a house right in downtown LA unless you're, worth multiple 7 or 8 figures, right? Maybe less. I don't know. Maybe there's ways you can get loans, but don't do that. Okay, so this is my point, because you're going to be paying 20,000-30,000 for the mortgage when your rent would be like 4,000 or 5,000 bucks. So again, the trade-off is that it's difficult to find tenants when you live further or your house is further from the city center, right? The closer to the city center, generally the more expensive. But my recommendation is that if you are trying to look for a house to go and build an ADU to then live in and use it as an investment property as well, that you look close enough to the city center or just major areas of work. So people that, let's say work, at like Qualcomm in San Diego, if you buy something in La Jolla, right? Like something near a major workplace or just downtown, that would make sense, right? That's my recommendation. Based off of my anecdotal experience with this. Okay, so it's been a month and I only have 1 tenant right now, and there's still 2 vacant. I'm only renting out 3 rooms, so there's still 2 vacant rooms. The tenant screening process, if you do it yourself, is very difficult and very time consuming. And so I wouldn't necessarily recommend hiring a property management company because they can do the same things. But if you want to really get the best tenants, I think you have to only you yourself is going to know that, right? And so you have to put in the time and effort if you want to do that. If you want to get whatever tenants you can find, just rent your property, you can do that, but they might end up breaking something or not paying the rent on time, and then that's your burden to bear. So the income for this property right now is negligible, okay? And the expenses are over 100,000, and so I didn't talk about this for the first property, but the cash on cash return for that one, which we're going to just touch on briefly because I forgot to say this, but if I do the cash on cash return, which is your annual cash flow divided by the total amount of money that you've invested into it, we're looking at give or take 1% to 2% for the first house. Okay, because I didn't purchase it just as an investment property, okay? You could find probably the best numbers if you go to some shitty part of town with like, terrible area that, you might not get great tenants, and all this, and then just get like the best numbers possible in terms of your rent recuperation, or just in terms of what you're getting for your return on investment. But that's not a sound way to go about investing in real estate, in my opinion, because worst comes to worst, you have these houses that you own that you can't sell. They better be in a good area because you're gonna have to live in one of them. And if you don't, then you're out of luck. So ultimately, that's the point. Like, you should buy a house because you want to live in it. That's why I purchased any of these properties. And so, yeah, if I look at annual cash flow, let's just say I made $100 in profit every month, after expenses for operating expenses and then calculating my rental income. That's like $1,200 a year divided by 100,000 that I put into the property in terms of my total net investment so far. Yeah, it comes out to like less than 2%. Okay. And there's of course like rules you can use to calculate whether or not an investment is going to be worth it based off of those numbers. And certainly, power to you if you want to use that. But again, anecdotally, I would say that short term, it's not profitable. You have to have a longer time horizon to see any sort of return on this type of stuff. So, the current house that I'm living in now, the value of the property has stayed the same. It's only been a year, not even. And I don't expect it to change much, but it'll probably go down in the near future, and take many years to go up. So that's just my level setting my expectations with what the market is going to do, because again, you have to have a long time horizon for this sort of investment. So I think that's enough about the 3 investment properties that I have. And I just want to give you guys just generally my recommendations in terms of, has it been worth it? And hopefully you've gotten an inkling of an idea of whether or not I think it's worth it through this video so far. But I would say that generally, yes, it is worth it, because I could be spending my money on an expensive apartment downtown, and blowing all my money and having nothing left in the bank, which I still hardly have much in the bank because I have 4 cars that take all my money anyway. But that's not the point of this video. And what I'm trying to say is that long term, I know my future self is probably going to thank me right now at my 26 years of age, having bought a couple houses and having done the thing and invested some of my time into doing that. But the return on investment that we didn't talk about this entire video is the return on investment of your time, right? And what I've been doing, the last few years, which should be fairly evident from the videos on my channel. I try to keep you guys updated with at least financially the things that I've done. So maybe there are some lessons learned that you guys can take away from. But, there's a pretty high opportunity cost with investing in real estate. And honestly, I probably should have said this at the beginning, because I don't know how many of you are still sticking around or have skipped to this section of the video. But that's like, if you take away one thing from all the lessons learned of my investing in real estate, is that there's a fairly high opportunity cost in terms of other investment vehicles that can give you possibly better returns, and take up less of your time, or the same amount of time for a much more scalable, or better result. Okay, so I would say that there's nothing wrong with investing in real estate. I think it's a great thing to do, but anybody can do it. There's no barrier to entry. There's little barrier to entry, but there's also an extremely great amount of competition in terms of a very saturated market of people that own houses that know how to rent them out. And this is nothing new. You're not creating anything new. It's just making money between the lines. And in some ways, I think my time is better suited doing other things. And so next year, maybe I'll finally watch my own videos and take a word or two of my own advice and do that. So I think the other thing is that for those of you that are in your 20s, early 20s, or around my age, or even if you're older, I think something you have to consider is where you get to live because of this investment that you're doing, right? So investing in real estate requires you to buy a house generally. You can't buy a 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom condo and then rent out a room, because then where are you going to live, right? The whole point is that you have a place to live and you can share that with other people. And then at the same time, you can have it offset your payment to the place that you would otherwise live by yourself, right? And so what am I going to do with a bunch of empty rooms sitting in my house? That doesn't make any sense, right? So you're not going to be able to do that downtown, like I said earlier in this video. You're going to have to look a little bit further from population centers, not necessarily like 30 minutes away. You could probably find something 5-10 minutes outside of downtown, but it's very unlikely you can afford even a townhouse in the very middle of your city that you could otherwise get an apartment and live right next to everything, all the bars and clubs, and if that's your thing, right next to all the restaurants and whatever else you want to do. But to me, generally speaking, if I need to go downtown and I want to go out, I can take an Uber. If I need to get to the airport, it's not far enough. It's not that far away. And I live in a safe area. I don't have to worry about my car getting broken into. My neighbors are good, and it's still near things that I need, like a grocery store, Costco, critical, and other things that are useful to me that I find valuable in terms of a place that you want to live that has good schools and stuff like that. So that's my 2 cents on whether or not it's been worth it. I think everyone is going to have their own opinion about this sort of thing, but I want to give you guys my take based off of the few years that I've spent investing in these 3 different properties that I've spent a great deal of time on that I could not put into words on a video. There are too many lessons or things that I've done that probably I don't even remember, like from my first house or the condo in SF now, that I've had to do. But hopefully this was useful for at least one person out there. And if anything, I'll probably watch this video again in a few years and think, like, what is this guy talking about? Because I'll be so much more intelligent at that time. Just kidding. That probably won't happen. But seriously, I do hope this is useful for somebody out there. And if you have any questions, let me know in the comment section below. I try to respond to anybody that has a somewhat reasonable question in the comment section or that's actually related to the video. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.